Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's HLA Hart Lecture. Herbert Linus Adolphus Hart was Professor of Jurisprudence here at University College between 1952 and 1969, and a fellow here at the college until 1973. He was then principal of Brasenose College, just across the way, from 1973 to 1978. Born in Harrogate in 1907, he practiced as a barrister at the Chancery Bar in the 1930s, then saw wartime service with first MI5 and then Bletchley Park. Rather than return to practice after the war, Hart accepted a teaching fellowship at New College, during which he established his reputation as a teacher and a scholar. Perhaps best known for the hugely influential work he wrote whilst at Univ, The Concept of Law, he is considered one of the world's foremost legal philosophers of the 20th century. His many wide-ranging publications sit at the nexus of law, philosophy, and politics. The H.L.A. Hart Visiting Fellowship was established here at University College in 2005 in memory of Herbert. In the decade following 2005, some 40 distinguished scholars were awarded the fellowship and enriched the intellectual life of the college and faculty with erudition and scholarly engagement. I'm very proud that that tradition of jurisprudence and philosophy continues at Univ today. So I'm delighted to be able to welcome and also to thank Professor Anita L, our distinguished Hart Visiting Fellow this year. And you will hear more about her distinguished career in a moment. A particular thank you to Lord Mance, whose generous contribution has secured the fellowship for the future, and also to Roy Fellman for his continued support. I'd like to thank Adam Hart and Francis Hollis for being here tonight, and if I may, a particular thank you to Ruth Chang, Professor Chang, whose relentless energy, and I have to focus on the word relentless, has made today possible. Professor Chang, over to you.
Thank you very much, Valerie. Welcome, everyone. We're truly honored and delighted to have as our 2024 HLA Hart Memorial Lecture, Professor Anita L, the Henry R. Silverman Professor of Law and Professor of Philosophy at the University of Pennsylvania, where she also served as Vice Provost for faculty. Professor Allen is a prolific scholar with a distinguished and varied career. She has been invited to give lectures around the world, from Toronto to Tilburg, Tel Aviv to Tokyo. She is best known as an expert on the law and philosophy of privacy. Lauded as her nation's leading privacy scholar, Allen has received the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Electronic Privacy Information Center, as well as the Annual Privacy Award of the Berkeley Center for Law and Technology. Her books include Privacy, Law, and Society, the most comprehensive textbook on U.S. privacy and data protection law, and Unpopular Privacy, What We Must Hide, a fascinating look at whether and why paternalistic laws that impose privacy on people who disvalue or dislike privacy, are consistent with liberal political ideals. Her most recent publications include Dismantling the Black Option, Privacy, Race, Equity, and Online Data Protection Reform, and 2 articles forthcoming this fall, Postmortem Privacy with Jennifer Rothman, and Is Privacy Really a Civil Right? With Christopher Mohawi. Professor Allen has an impressive list of firsts to her name. She was the very first American philosopher to publish a book about privacy. She was the first African American to hold both a PhD in philosophy, which she received from the University of Michigan, and a JD, which she received from Harvard Law School. She's the first African-American woman to be elected president of any division of the American Philosophical Association. She is the first African-American woman to be awarded the Philip Quinn Prize of the American Philosophical Association for outstanding lifetime service to the philosophy profession. And last but not least, she is the first, and I dare say only, professional philosopher lawyer to have shared a modern dance class with Madonna, who was her fellow student, not the instructor. I'm guessing, too, that she is the first and only professional philosopher lawyer to be the model for a woodcut afternoon of a Georgia faun, which you can find in the permanent collection of the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C. Professor Allen is an elected member of the National Academy of Medicine, the American Law Institute, the American Philosophical Society, and a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. She was a member of the National Advisory Committee for Human Genome Research, and President Obama appointed her in 2010 to the Presidential Commission for the Study of Bioethical Issues. For this and other work, she was recently presented the Hastings Center Founders Award for contributions to bioethics. She has served on the boards of many charities and professional associations and currently serves on the advisory board of the School for Criticism and Theory at Cornell University and on the boards of directors of the National Constitution Center and the Future of Privacy Forum. She holds honorary degrees from the University of Tilburg in the Netherlands and the College of Worcester in the US. Anita Allen also has a compelling public presence. She's been profiled in the New York Times. She's featured in many podcasts and is included in her own chapter, Philosopher Queens, a book published here in the UK about path-breaking women philosophers. She's appeared over the years on The Ethical Edge, 2020, Nightline, Good Morning America, 60 Minutes, Face the Nation, Talk of the Nation, and other television and radio programs. She's written for the popular press, including O, the Oprah magazine, thedailybeast.com, and the Newark Star Ledger. Now, Allen is not a complete stranger to Oxford. She was St. Hilda College's first Joyce Mitchell Cook Lecturer in 2020 and a visiting scholar at the Blavatnik School in 2022. Today, Professor Allen launches another first. She is the first Black person to give the H.L.A. Hart Lecture in the long history of the Hart Lecture, a fact of which Professor Allen was glad for me to note here. In today's lecture, Professor Allen investigates how love, and specifically what she calls unconditional love, can be an illuminating lens through which to understand the law. We are thrilled and honored to have her deliver the 2024 H.L.A. Hart Memorial Lecture. Please join me in welcoming her.
Thank you so much, Professor Chang. I hardly recognize myself in that introduction. Thank you so much. The invitation to deliver the H.L.A. Hart Memorial Lecture here at University College, Oxford, is an honor I never imagined possible for me. Being here is truly a pinnacle of my career. For me, Hart's book, The Concept of Law, is the most perfect book of legal theory ever published in the canon, combining clarity and insight with importance and influence. Hart's views on sexual morality influenced greatly my own views about constitutional decisional privacy law, and his lesser-known views about the exercise of discretion actually played a big role in my approach to exercising discretion in my role as Vice Provost for faculty at my university. So I owe Hart big time for many different contributions to my professional and scholarly life. Master Valerie Amos, I thank you for hosting me. I thank Lord Mons for recently endowing the Hart Mons Visiting Fellowship in perpetuity. I thank Professor Chang for your work, immense work planning this event. And I'd like to thank the college staff, especially Manuela Williams, who made sure that all the practical matters tied to making this event possible were sorted efficiently. So, thank you. Now, down to brass tacks. I won't be directly referring to the handout, but I want you to know that the handout is a pretty nice summary of what I'm going to tell you today, so please feel free to refer to it during the lecture. It goes without saying that societies and individuals pursue values and ends through the law, an obvious point. H.L.A. Hart once remarked in this regard that there are certain features of legal institutions and legal rules that must be understood if we're to understand the overall aims and purposes of the law. And so, picking up on that idea, certain features of the US legal system that it shares with other countries, including your own, seem to me to be understandable, comprehensible as exemplars of the ideal of unconditional love. Now, unconditional love is a label typically affixed to a type of emotion or mental state that is enduring, loyal, and generous. Now, modern no-fault divorce law obviously isn't an example of unconditional love law, right? Because it means severing love ties in order to move on and have a fresh start. The kinds of laws I am talking about include spousal privileges in the law of evidence, laws requiring parents to financially support their adult children, policies permitting prison visitation, and abortion laws. I'm going to be arguing that these 4 areas of law in particular, and perhaps others that one might name, are constituted by rules and policies that are tolerable to the morally and religiously diverse communities governed by those laws, because people implicitly accept that unconditional love is an important value and goal. The legal theorist Joseph Raz, also an Oxford celebrity, illuminated marital, parental, and friendship love as a powerful attachment that makes life meaningful. It's no wonder then that the law serves to fulfill the aims of various conceptions of unconditional love. A love that is, for those who are lucky and determined, can mean a life of care, concern, and compassionate companionship. Now, the ways in which unconditional love insinuates itself into the law is seldom discussed by anyone. And that's why I wanted to discuss it with you today, because it's seldom discussed by anyone. It's a neglected, overlooked topic. Now, there are a few exceptions. Episodically, law has been heralded as a domain in which love is the foundation. There are those who think that the normative foundation of law is love. In addition, unconditional love makes a cameo appearance in the doctrine of consideration in contract law. And it manifests itself in the law of fitness for child custody and child rearing in family law. It's mentioned trivially as an emotion felt by dogs for humans. That's in the law too. I'm going to take up the topic of love in relation to law here, focusing on unconditional love as it pertains to parents and children, siblings, close friends. I'll suggest that among the reasons we need to take the idea of unconditional love seriously is because it is such an important part of our law. This familiar concept in everyday morality and ethical life turns out to be one that seeps consequentially into law and policy, mattering to rights and duties. And while I'm not advocating for unconditional love or endorsing in every way the law might include it, I will be arguing that familiar features and requirements of the law can be better understood if we understand them as embodiments of the pervasive norms and expectations of unconditional love. At bottom, my argument relies on the facticity of unconditional love, not on its normativity, that is, not on claims about its being normatively correct or incorrect. First, a bit of context for this overall perspective. To prepare the way for my argument, I want to just share with you my observations about unconditional familial love in everyday life. Well, academic philosophers have labored to understand the forms and conditions of love. We know that. Theologians have probed love concepts too. On this very day, by the way, audience, Cornel West is delivering a lecture at the University of Edinburgh in which he argues for love as a needed response to current global societal ills. Many modern writers on the topic of love in other intellectual spheres include Toni Morrison, Simone Weil, James Baldwin, Thich Nhat Hanh, Mahatma Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. These are all famous examples of people who've identified resilient forms of love as pathways to fulfillment, solidarity, social justice, and peace. What unconditional love is or should be is contested among philosophers, who, of course, contest the definition and meaning of everything. That's their job. But in my experience, unconditional love in the family context is a label attached to a minimally bounded, altruistic, sustained kind of attitude and practice or emotion marked by affectionate care, concern, and companionship. It's not a love blind to fault and wrongdoing or free from judgment, criticism, and nudging. Yet unconditional love survives serious offense and malfeasance. Some, but not all, thinkers believe unconditional love can be symmetrical, unsymmetrical, asymmetrical, and unrequited, that it may be a longing that in fact does not require or have a quid pro quo. I observe unconditional love in the love that my friends and family have for their children. And recently I've come to realize that the resilient love I have for my own children, one of whom is intellectually disabled, could be termed unconditional in two respects. First, as a matter of the limits of my imagination, I cannot imagine not loving my children so long as I'm mentally sound, come what may. And secondly, a matter of experience, I have continued to supply my children with affectionate attention and material aid, notwithstanding bad behavior towards me, their father, and other people. Unconditional love is also reflected in the way many people feel about spouses and partners. Indeed, I would describe the love I have for my spouse of 40 years as unconditional. The romantic love that often propels marriages is sometimes understood as unconditional in essence. Shakespeare's famous sonnet 116, love is not love which alters when it alteration finds. Dubious claim. The traditional marriage vow, purports to bind people for better or for worse, in sickness and in health, richer, poorer, till death do you part. Yet the performance of such vows is no guarantee at all that a partner's love is or will ever be unconditional. Nor does everyone agree what unconditional love requires throughout the life of a relationship. T.S. Eliot is one of my favorite poets. When Vivian Hay Wood Eliot, the wife of T.S. Eliot, was committed to the Northumberland House Mental Hospital in London in 1938, the celebrated Nobel Prize-winning poet never once visited his wife, even though she was there until she died in 1947. Nicola Lacey's biography of H.L.A. Hart reveals a man who had, quote, few intimate conversations with others, unquote, and whose insecurities, Jewish heritage, and cloaked sexuality made authentic friendship and family ties all the more important. One must admire Hart's openness with his wife, Jennifer Hart, who revealed in their letters the extent to which their love appears to have been remarkably resilient and unconditional. Unconditional love can be an invaluable gift in a world that does not always allow us to live our best lives. The love shared by siblings is often unconditional in my experience, in my perception. Take, for example, the children of US presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy, brother of President John F. Kennedy, who was also assassinated. Well, last year, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., a lawyer known for spouting conspiracy theories, declared his unlikely candidacy for the United States presidency, a challenger to President Joe Biden, who's also had his interesting unconditional love sagas. Not Caroline Kennedy, but Kathleen Kennedy, Carrie Kennedy, I guess it's her nickname, Carrie Kennedy, who heads the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Foundation, named for their famous father, felt compelled to publicly distance herself and the foundation from the controversial views of her brother. Her clearly embarrassed but careful public statements implied that moral and political disagreement are not reasons a virtuous sibling ceases loving a brother. Quote, "I love my brother Bobby, but I do not share or endorse his opinions on many topics, including the COVID pandemic, vaccinations, the role of social media platforms, and policing false information." And finally, close friends sometimes are described as chosen family, and unconditional love associated with families often exists between intimates who are not bound by biology or by law. So no less than families, loving friends give generously to one another, and they stand by one another through emotional turmoil, legal and health battles, and shared ordeals of travel and adventure. Assuming, as Emily Rorty, the philosopher Emily Rorty, has argued, that loving wisely and well demands challenging care and work, then unconditional love is a heavy burden indeed. If love entails virtues and duties, unconditional love may require extreme virtues and extreme duties. If love entails generosity, then unconditional love may entail extreme generosity. Stepping outside the family context for just a moment, the unconditional love that virtue demands of oppressed people, according to James Baldwin, may be to love even the oppressor. The oppressed must love even the oppressor. The slave must love even the slaver. On the flip side, the privileged in our society may have an obligation to love even those whom society condemns and marginalizes. Recently, a number of philosophers have argued that unconditional romantic, familial, and parental love should be rejected on the grounds that there are many more healthy and more ethical and more equitable kinds of love. The best love in lovers will have self-affirming boundaries and limits. Now, these philosophers may have a point, but my objective, again, is not to advance an argument for or against unconditional love. My aim is rather to excavate its partially buried presence in the law and to consider its implications. But what do I mean by unconditional love? I need something of a definition. Giving a full-fledged analysis of unconditional love is far beyond what I can do this evening. So I'm going to stipulate a simple account of unconditional love that's heavily influenced by the work of a philosopher, American philosopher named Nico Kolodny. Drawing on ordinary usages and mindful of wide theoretical disagreement, I will thus stipulate, along the lines of Kolodny, that familial love is a set of emotions, attitudes, and practices grounded in relationships and care. Three particular traits, I think, are very core to what I mean by unconditional love. One trait, durability and constancy. The love has endured with substantial constancy over time. That's the kind of love that we want to call unconditional. Love at first sight cannot be unconditional love. It may in time prove to be unconditional love, but love at first sight is never unconditional love. Second trait, loyalty and fidelity. There's no probable set of circumstances under which a lover X would cease to love a beloved Y and readily place that person's interests above Y's. Offensiveness and malfeasance will not undercut unconditional love. The third trait, generosity and self-sacrifice. So long as X is capable, material and emotional benefits will voluntarily flow from person X to a person Y. Unconditional love does not require epistemic awareness, reciprocity, or symmetry. You don't have to be aware that your love is unconditional for it to be unconditional. It doesn't have to be returned, it doesn't have to be of the same quality or magnitude. Unconditional love in the above stipulated sense can motivate concern, care, and companionship vitally needed for human flourishing. It can be a positive and powerful force within relationships inside and outside of conventional heteronormative secular or religious marriages and families. But unconditional love is not necessarily a good thing. Unconditional love comes with potential ethical and practical challenges. 3 such challenges merit a special mention: exploitation, risk, and public dereliction. Exploitation, well, being on the receiving end of unconditional love may lead a person to develop unfair expectations about the extent of other people's willingness and obligation to meet their needs, tolerate their foibles, and solve their problems. Loving someone unconditionally might cause a person to take risk. They're using drugs, I'll use drugs with them, right? They're engaging in dangerous sports like base jumping and mountain climbing, I'll do that too. And then there's a problem I will term public dereliction. In the United States, government takes only limited responsibility for its citizens' basic human needs. And if you don't believe me, drive through downtown Los Angeles today. The sight of human suffering, the extent of human suffering you will see on the streets will shock you. You will think, am I really in a wealthy Western nation at all? The material contributions to well-being expected of unconditionally loving families are outsized compared to the material contributions available from local, state, and federal governments. Yet government claims the right to dictate the terms of otherwise private arrangements for marriages and caregiving for children and the elderly and the disabled. In fact, ethical norms of unconditional love are political norms as well and serve the logic of anti-welfarist ideologies of limited government under capitalism. The message: you love unconditionally, you ought to love unconditionally, therefore you, not your neighbors or the government, should bear the costs of your loved one's well-being. Now, the implications for the law. I'm going to start with the example of spousal evidentiary privileges and a story. A young couple in their 20s, Otis and Elizabeth Trammell, were married in May 1975. A few months later, they were arrested, first him in around July, and then her in around September. They were charged with importing and conspiring to import heroin from Thailand and the Philippines. The prosecutors offered Elizabeth an immunity from prosecution deal that required she testify in court against her husband. She took the deal, and she testified, even though her husband maintained that the law allowed him to prevent her from testifying. The trial court judge, his name was John Barrett, rejected Otis's assertion of marital privilege and said it was inconceivable, this is a quotation, inconceivable that the Trammells established a home of any usual ordinary attributes of a family life, with any of the usual ordinary attributes of family life. They hadn't done that. Well, based on the strength of Elizabeth's testimony, Otis was convicted and imprisoned. He unsuccessfully appealed his conviction to the Eighth Circuit Court of Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court. The U.S. Supreme Court found that the relevant spousal privilege applicable to federal courts would bar a court or prosecutors from compelling adverse testimony from a spouse, but that even though protecting the sanctity, harmony, and peace of marriage is the modern basis of the privilege, a wife or husband who chooses to do so may testify against her spouse. So poor Otis was stuck in jail. Maybe he's still there. An adverse testimony privilege, which the American courts, I think, originally inherited from the English courts, and a second spousal communication privilege recognized by our Supreme Court in Federal Rules of Procedure, permit a spouse to refuse to give testimony against their accused husband or wife without fear of judicial sanction or punishment. Privileges have detractors because they can result in a miscarriage of justice. Quite literally, someone, an innocent person, can walk free because their spouse has refused to testify against them. With varying degrees of conceptual precision, the American courts and legal commentators offer not unconditional love, but other overlapping reasons for the spousal evidentiary privileges, namely the protection of marriage, the harmony and sanctity of marriage, peace in families, trust strengthening, the privacy of the spouses, and witness perjury disincentive. The legal scholar and U.S. federal judge Richard Posner has puzzled over the rationale for spousal privileges. And using his infamous cost-benefit analysis, he ultimately concluded that actually the privileges may reduce some collateral costs, but that actually the benefits gained from the privilege and the benefits that would come from getting rid of it are about the same. The benefits and costs are about the same. So forget about it. It's a wash. So he's not against the privileges, but he's also not for them. I guess is the way I'm to put that. I believe that if spouses are presumed or expected to share unconditional love, the grounds for the spousal privileges become more clear. First, unconditional love ascribed to spouses means spouses are presumed and required to be loyal and faithful. Unconditional lovers stand by the person so loved and will not be easily persuaded that assisting a criminal prosecution or a civil liability finding is the right thing to do. Spouses may care more about the unhappiness and problems of their beloved than about abstract justice or about the victims of crime or victims of civil wrongdoing. Second, unconditional love means that spouses are generous and self-sacrificing. Spouses will have unusually strong incentives to perjure themselves because of unconditional love. Put the spouse on the witness stand, they might lie, and you don't want to do that, so immunize them from having to testify at all. Unconditional love has grit. It is durable and constant. But the privileges to refuse to divulge confidences or adverse facts means marriages are protected so that constancy need not be tested at all, need not be put to the test at all. Next example is parental responsibility for adult children. In the notorious Italian Bambocchioni case from 2023, a woman in her 70s took her middle-aged sons, aged 40 and 42, to court to have them evicted from her house in Pavia. The freeloading offspring were living there rent-free without contributing to upkeep or finances, even though they were both able-bodied and had jobs, earned wages. The mum won her case. An American or British parent would be likely to win a similar case, because in the US and the UK, parents' legal responsibility to provide for their children normally ends once the children have become adults. Yet, we know, adult children may face challenges such as physical disabilities, mental health issues, economic hardships, and criminal histories which prevent them from becoming self-sufficient. The CARE Act of 2015 in England aims to ensure that disabled persons over the age of 18 can receive adult care and support benefits. My understanding is that the Act imposes a duty on local authorities to promote well-being and to aid caregivers in rendering services based on assessed needs up to a legislated maximum amount. In the US, disabled children and adults are eligible for federal supplemental security income, Medicaid, and nutrition benefits to help pay for housing, care, and health care and food. But the benefits are extremely meager, not generous, less than $900 a month in most cases. Now, parents can voluntarily continue to support their children beyond adulthood for whatever practical and moral reasons they may have of their own. Many parents understand supporting adult children as an extension of their role as caregivers. Other parents may extend aid to secure companionship and affection. Some U.S. jurisdictions, such as California, Maryland, and my home state of Pennsylvania, impose a statutory duty on parents to continue to support children after age 18 if the children are mentally or physically disabled. In addition, and this is what I found very surprising myself when I began looking at this issue last year, in addition, there's a qualified obligation in Pennsylvania to provide college or university tuition for children over 18. Now, courts apply a two-pronged test to decide whether or not a parent has to provide college tuition and accommodation support. They ask whether the child has a desire and ability to successfully pursue post-secondary education, and secondly, if so, whether the parent can provide support without undue hardship. Having applied this test, one particular Pennsylvania court considered a third factor, namely whether the child and the parent are estranged. The college-aged child in question had spat on his mother, shoved her to the ground, and abandoned her home and counsel. For this reason, the court's majority suspended the mother's obligation to provide college support. Yet 3 dissenting judges argued that the majority concocted out of thin air the requirement that adult children not be estranged from their parent, and insisted that children do not have to be deserving in order to have a right to parental support for higher education. It seems to me that the fact that adult children have needs cannot explain why their parents should be allocated some or all of the caregiving or financial responsibilities for their children. Parents of adult children may lack the ability to control the lives of those children. They may have different values, beliefs, and lifestyles and religions that make sharing a home and resources misery-making and impractical. I suggest that the belief that parental love is or should be unconditional can help explain the questionable laws that require parents to care for adult children. Parents are supposed to love come what may, according to unconditional love, and a calendar birthday is not per se a moral boundary to limit love's gifts. Parents are morally expected to want to make the lives of their children comfortable, and especially children who are needy or disabled. Both durability and constancy, and generosity and self-sacrifice are defining features of unconditional love, and in the anti-welfarist regime of the United States, help to explain the arguably unfair assignment of support obligations to the parents of children with needs. Next example, abortion law. The popular London-based philosopher Simon May argues that the child is recent modernity's notion of the supremely fit object of love. Parental love has gained in salience, and romantic love has receded, he maintains. The average length of human gestation is 40 weeks. On August 4, 2015, Angel Perez was born by a cesarean section at only 30 weeks of gestation. Remarkably, during the last 8 weeks of those 30 weeks, his mother was brain dead. Cesarean section delivery within a few minutes of a mother's death is, according to the scientific literature I've reviewed, fairly common. But keeping a brain-dead person's bodily functions operational so that they can incubate a non-viable fetus was extraordinary. Let's say an extraordinary act of imposed maternal unconditional love. In American family law, fit guardians of children are expected to lovingly tend to their children's best interests. This is often taken to mean that fit guardians will, quote, demonstrate unconditional love, unquote. Just as children need healthy food and water and shelter, education, they are said to need unconditional love. The Restrictive abortion laws taking hold again in the United States place strict limits on women's ability to terminate their pregnancies. They seem to be based in large part on a belief that maternal love is or ought to be strongly unconditional, combined with the belief that such love begins or ought to begin as soon as the future offspring can be harmed. And when is that? When can a future offspring be harmed? Proponents of restrictive abortion laws assert that the relevant moment is, for example, the moment of conception, or the moment of uterine implantation, or the moment of fetal heartbeat, or the ability to feel pain, or fetal viability. Since maternal love is properly unconditional, it does not matter that a child's birth would impose medical, social, or financial, or psychological hardships. The love that one has for one's child is supposed to be generous and self-sacrificing. Your English law. The English Abortion Act permits abortion up to week 24 of pregnancy if physicians find that one of several criteria are met. These are state-sanctioned reasons for seeking abortion, and they include social or environmental factors as well as medical risk and severe fetal abnormalities. But today's radical anti-abortion rights advocates in my country would regard most of the usual reasons the UK pregnant persons cite for their abortions as morally invalid reasons. They are invalid not just because the unborn may be properly termed a human being or a person, but more importantly because the pregnant individual is supposed to manifest unconditional love toward the unborn. Yet hard thinking about what love is and may require in the family context could lead to reasons for embracing permissive abortion laws. The most obvious reason is that sometimes pregnant individuals have unconditional love relationships with multiple people in the family, even multiple children. A pregnant individual may have very significant obligations to provide for an unconditionally loved elderly parent, or a sick spouse, or a young child in the home. And that early abortion is a better resolution of the conflicts of love and responsibility than not. Thus, rather than evidencing a rejection of unconditional love, the UK Abortion Act's allowances for environmental factors seems to me to be a show of respect for the complexities of unconditional love and moral life. I like your law better than ours. A number of philosophers, women philosophers it happens, have argued recently that love for the unborn is highly consistent with abortion. These include Liz Harman, who was here just last week making this argument, as well as Sherry Kolb, and a number of years ago, Ruth Kolker. Kolker argued in a 1989 article that sometimes it's a matter of timing abortion. Pregnant teenagers could easily feel that they should postpone a greater love, along with women who are in the college studies, thick in college studies, or who are just coming out of painful divorces, or who are weakened by cancer treatments. There are many situations in which people may feel that as if I really love the unborn, I love my own unborn child, but I'm not in a position to give that person the care that they deserve. I'm going to postpone childbirth until later in my life. And in this situation, the child that eventually is born and is loved maybe can be born to a greater love, a better love, and they are, of course, equally worthy offspring. My last example, prison visitation. Last summer, a man named Rex Hoyerman, an architect who owned a big architecture firm in New York City, was arrested and eventually charged with the murders of 4 women whose bodies were found dumped near his Long Island home. His wife of 27 years, her name was H.L.A, reportedly filed for divorce within days of his arrest. Yet, as of March 2024, this past March, she had made several documented visits to him in jail, 7 to be exact. And she said that she was giving him the benefit of the doubt. He was, in her mind, innocent until proven guilty. His 2 adult children have stayed away from their father, who is being held without bail pending trial. Is it surprising that the estranged wife visits the accused serial killer? Now, she's under contract with NBC Universal to cooperate in the making of a documentary film about what have come to be known as the Gilgo Beach murders. And this gives her a financial incentive for visiting her husband in jail and for having a reserved tone about his guilt or innocence. But from a public policy point of view, is it surprising that a person is permitted to visit a man accused of killing 4 women, even if the visitor is his wife and wants to visit? I believe notions of unconditional love are at work in prison visitation policies that open prison gates to family members of even the worst offenders. Separating families can result in extremes of human suffering. Family separation is a well-documented, well-recognized incident of incarceration. Spouses and partners are separated from one another, parents and children, children and grandchildren, siblings, extended kin. Mitigating such separation is the fact that most prisoners are permitted visitors. Prisons, reformatories, and jails may have policies that create interests and expectations in visitation, but the U.S. Supreme Court has declined to find that the Constitution requires visitation rights, or that visitation policies necessarily give inmates a right to a hearing or any kind of a complaint if their visitors are prohibited from visiting. Now, despite the fact that there's often a right to visitation in the American prison context, many Americans find that they cannot visit their loved ones in prison because sometimes prisoners are sent to far remote locations. Your family may be in Kentucky, the prison may send you to a private prison in Washington State, thousands of miles away. European jails and prisons tend to have more generous and reasonable visitation policies in U.S. prisons, allowing longer visits, allowing unsupervised visits, allowing visits to take place in private spaces, and allowing even extensive contact with the outside world on furloughs. That prisons are set up with policies and practices to allow visitation by loved ones can be explained in the case of convicts expecting to rejoin society on grounds that preserving relationships with family and friends could promote rehabilitation and non-recidivism. Visitation is believed to improve prisoner morale and discipline and to preserve relationships that may be critical to emotional well-being. But there's a puzzle, right? Because people are imprisoned for heinous, violent crimes, kidnapping, raping, beating, murdering, and even dismembering innocent people. So why would family members wish to visit cruel and vicious such kin, even if valid peniological purposes are served by visitation? And why should dangerous and despicable individuals condemned to life in prison or on death row be permitted to receive visits from willing family members? Why? Well, unconditional love explains why family members may wish to visit kin they believe are wrongfully or unjustly confined. But unconditional love can also, and more interestingly, explain something harder to understand, which is why individuals may wish to visit incarcerated kin they know to be guilty and believe to be dangerous. Where familial love is unconditional, the fact that the confined person is a heinous offender does not mean that spouses, children, and parents won't still wish to see and interact with them. Jeffrey Dahmer was one of the most notorious American serial killers of all time. Numerous movies and documentaries chronicle his horrific crimes. He preyed upon young men whom he kidnapped, he sexually assaulted, he murdered, he dismembered, and whose remains he is said to have desecrated and eaten. Yet his father, Lionel Dahmer, who had, by the way, tried to get his son help many times, frequently visited his son in prison. He visited him often until his son was murdered by a fellow inmate. Not all family members who wish loved ones who wish to visit their loved ones in prison do so fully voluntarily. We have to recognize that not everybody who visits their loved one in prison does so voluntarily, because even people behind bars can exercise sort of moral coercion over family members outside. Family members may feel compelled by fear of retaliation by an inmate's associates on the outside of the prison to visit them, to bring visitors, and to provide requested commissary money, and then contraband like phones and drugs and other things that are not really allowed in the jail. In this way, the visitation policies of prison may further dysfunctional intrafamilial exploitation and bullying as well as love. They may inhibit loved ones on the outside from getting on with their lives. It may ironically inhibit the growth of new unconditional love. So now I wish to draw some conclusions. In the written version of my lecture, I cite numerous philosophers talking about unconditional love. Philosophers can be commended for their already extensive attention to the concept of unconditional love, taking it very seriously. My lecture has been intended to ignite an interest among legal theorists to think about unconditional love, to take unconditional love seriously as a matter of jurisprudence and law. To that end, I have excavated partially submerged unconditional familial love concepts at play in the law. Beyond my examples, I assume there are other examples that one might give of unconditional love in the law. Maybe in the law of trust and estates, maybe in the law of marriage and divorce, in the law of privacy, the law of confidentiality, the law of fraud and deceit. There may be lots of areas of law where the reasons why we have these laws become much clearer if we think that unconditional love is at work behind the scenes. I regret that I could not do more than allude to the political and distributional ramifications of unconditional love in the law. Given harsh racial and economic disparities in marriage rates, single parenting, poverty, unplanned and unwanted pregnancy, and incarceration, the legal and moral demands of unconditional love fall heaviest on vulnerable populations. There is much, much, much more understanding to be pursued in this domain. I thank you.